a really special place to eat. So, y'all come on and settle in. We have Russell here. So everyone say hi to Russell. Russell is our translator today. Um, yeah. And I'm gonna pass it over to Russell and Chef Rocio Aguilar to talk about how to make Mirliton lasagna. Yay!
Hey todos, todes, pues sí, Rocío Aguilar, soy hondureña de nacimiento, eh, amante de la cocina, ¿verdad? Chef, Rocío, me da hasta un poco de risa. Pero sí, esta tarde voy a mostrarles o voy a compartir con ustedes lo que sería eh, la receta de una lasaña de chayote, pataste o Mirliton, creo que le dicen acá. Entonces, ahí está con ustedes.
That was the wonderful Chef Roussel Aguilar, Honduran by birth. She's going to be with us here today, telling us how we're going to make Mirliton lasagna, chayote, or pataste, by the different words in Spanish. She's very happy to be here. Very Honduran.
Entonces, ¿verdad? Vamos a suplantar lo que sería la pasta de la lasaña por el chayote. Igual vamos a hacer las capas que debe de llevar la lasaña. En este caso, nuestra lasaña solo lleva carne de res, el queso. Bueno, yo estoy usando queso mozzarella, pero usted puede usar el que a usted le guste, obviamente.
We're going to start with the layers of pasta that we put over the Mirliton. And we'll put these into the layers with ground beef. Like you like, she's using mozzarella cheese. You can use any cheese that you like.
E incluso si eres vegetariano, puedes usar, ¿verdad?, alguna otra opción que tú sientas que va de acuerdo a tu preferencia alimenticia. Puedes usar jamón, puedes usar carne de pollo, de soya. O sea que hay muchas cosas que puedes usar para suplentar o cambiar la carne.
And of course, if you're a vegetarian, you can replace the cheese with anything that meets your dietary needs. You can also switch up the meats. You can use ham. You can anything that you like to give it the flavor that you want.
Y pues yo he compartido con ustedes la receta, pero también pues estoy usando los productos, ¿verdad?, que están a punto de salir de la huerta, que es el chayote, el tomate, ¿verdad? Tenemos cebolla, chilito, esos condimentos que a usted tanto le gusta para darle sabor y sazón a esa carne.
And we're using all of the wonderful things that you can take out of your garden, the chilies, the tomatoes,
Onion,
onions, cilantro, anything that you grow in your garden that tastes good on your lasagna, you can put in.
Puedes usar normalmente, ¿verdad?, lo que es la sal y la pimienta. En mi caso, en mi país usamos mucho el caldo o consomé o el adobo, muchas veces le llaman, para sazonar este tipo de carnes, así que esa es opción suya, pero pues es el sabor, ¿verdad?, que viene de mi tierra.
And you can use salt and pepper on the meat, obviously, but in Latin American countries, they'll use things like adobo or other spices. You can use the spice that you feel is best for your food, but this is the spice that she would use from her homeland.
Dices, ¿cómo va a hacer que eso se va a amarrar? El queso va a hacer que perfectamente esta lasaña quede juntita, pero sobre todo, pues, vamos a tener que hacer, ¿verdad?, igualmente las capas de esa lasaña para que se vea rica, sepa rica y se vea súper deliciosa.
That was a disquisition on the layers of lasagna and how good the cheese is going to look. When we set it all up together, you set the cheese to let the lasagna come together, and you put the layers all together to make it look excellent and taste delicious. Consecutive interpretation is very hard with cooking.
Es bastante. Entonces, no sé si hay una pregunta, algo más que quieran
Is
saber
there a
del
question?
plato.
Do you have any questions or anything that you want to ask people in Internet Night? If you have any questions, type them in the chat.
So is there pasta in it, or is the Mirliton replaces the pasta?
¿Hay pasta o el melocón lo reemplaza? ¿El chayote lo reemplaza el pasta?
el chayote está reemplazando la pasta. Entonces no tenemos pasta.
The melatonin is replacing the pasta in this dish, friends. So there is no pasta in this version that we're making.
So it's gluten-free, huh?
So gluten-free.
Does she sometimes skin the Mirliton? Because when I make dishes, I take the skin off, but I see the skin is still on.
I cheated and read the recipe. She does not skin the Mirliton, and you don't have to. Fue la pregunta si sacar
Si,
cáscara, ¿verdad?
si tus chayotes son muy grandes, posiblemente va a tocar pelarlos, pero si son un tamaño no tan exagerado, no tienes por qué hacerlo.
If your melitons are this big, you might have to take and peel them. But if you have a smaller melon, it may not be necessary to peel them.
Y tú puedes usar el chayote completo, no tienes por qué sacar la semilla, ya cocida, pues está deliciosa.
You can use the whole thing. You don't even have to take the seeds out because together it tastes delicious.
¿Alguna otra pregunta?
Other
Pero sí,
questions?
Normalmente lo que hago es cocer el chayote antes, al menos 20-25 minutos, eso está en la receta obviamente, pero sí, cocemos el chayote entero y ya después una vez está, tú puedes, como dicen a veces la prueba de meter algo, sale suave, entra suave y sale suave, es porque ya están cocidos.
She cooks the chayote, the melitons for 20 to 25 minutes, but you can always do the toothpick test for when they're tender, so you'll know no matter what size your melitons are when they're ready.
Y también tienes que tener cuidado con la cantidad de agua que la carne va a tener, o el juguito sería como el caldo, porque recuerda que el chayote es bastante agua, entonces va a soltar mucho de ella después cuando esté en el horno.
And we want to be really careful with the water, and I'm shouting for the people on the internet, but I guess I could just use the microphone. We want to be really careful with the level of the water in the meat because the chayote melon has a lot of water in it already, so you don't want it to be too juicy. And I forgot something that I was supposed to interpret earlier. Instead of using salt and pepper, when she uses adobo, she'll also use some consomme, or like you can use bouillon cubes to do that.
¿Alguna otra pregunta?
Anything else? Other questions? Internet friends?
Pero espero que también pues todos puedan ver la receta, ¿verdad? Que la puedan compartir acá y pues todos podamos aprender juntos cómo hacer en el futuro una lasaña de chayote.
And we have the recipe here, and we hope you have a copy of it there on the internet so we can all share together and learn how to make this delicious lasagna. Other questions, internet friends? Type into the chat. So the question from the back, in case you couldn't hear, was we traditionally eat melon around the holidays. Is there any traditional time for eating melon? ¿Hay algún temporada, alguna temporada tradicional como Navidad, nada así?
No creo que para el plato en sí, pero hay otro tipo de verdad de plato que se usa con lo que es el chayote para los tiempos de Semana Santa.
There is a Holy Week dish. There is a Holy Week dish that it's not this lasagna, but they do use a melon to make a Holy Week dish.
Entonces, obviamente, si es en este tiempo de Semana Santa, vas a omitir la carne, ¿verdad? Pero puedes hacer chayotes rellenos o incluso hacer la lasaña sin carne, solo con queso.
So for Holy Week, obviously you're not going to have meat in it. So what they'll do is they'll make stuffed melons, but you could also make this lasagna recipe since it doesn't have meat in it for Holy Week.
También puedes agregarle la salsa de tomate que sea de tu preferencia, incluso hacerla en casa. En este caso no he hecho salsa, estoy tratando de que la carne tenga un poco de color del tomate para evitar un poquito más los pasos, pero también puedes hacerlo.
And you can use tomato, you can go with red gravy, you can use tomato sauce in this, you can use salsa in this. She's not doing the tomato sauce because she wants a little different color on the meat. She wants the meat to pick up the color of the licuado, the mix that she has in here, which is on the recipe.
Y el licuado pues lleva los condimentos que usted quiera. Yo puse tomate, algo de apio, cebolla, ajo, chiles. Así que ahí está la receta. Usted lo va a ir viendo poco a poco.
I'm cheating off the recipe, guys, because as you see here on the recipe, she is giving you the instructions for the vegetables you put in the blender. You can put whatever vegetables you like, but this one is using tomatoes, onion, chili, coriander, celery, and garlic. Other questions out in internet land and our friends here in the garden.
Amazing. Awesome. Well,
Smashing.
yeah.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Miss Pepper, you gonna dazzle us?
I don't know about dazzle because I did not memorize it, but I did pull out the facts for you. So, because I actually, this is such a fun thing, to be honest. So,
Are you good to take the mic?
um, I don't know.
We can.
Can you hear
it.
me? Oh, for
The recording.
oh, okay. Sure, I'll hold it. You want to Lysol it? Is that what
Yeah,
we're doing?
let's
You can
Lysol
say it. I mean, where are you going? Lysol.
We're a health conscious people here.
We are waiting in our 2 weeks for our second vaccination to kick in group of people here. Okay. Well, I'll put it. Is this close enough? Are we good? Can we hear me? No? Yes?
little
Maybe
closer
we're
if
not
you are.
sure.
Yeah, there we go.
Hello? Fantastic. I'm ready for my close-up, Mr. Girl. So, hi out there. For those of you who are watching, I am Pepper Roussel. I'm going to be taking you through a history of the Mirliton. And when we hear anywhere else, it's called a chayote squash, and that is because it originated in Mesoamerica. So think Middle America, well before colonization, and so that would be the Central American countries like Guatemala, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, and so it is a member which of the cucumber family, which I find terribly interesting because I didn't know that. It's also part of the gourd family, or rather, but it's a berry, which made it very difficult to market in the U.S. when the English came in. Folks who had already been in New Orleans or in Louisiana didn't care so much about the marketing. It's what you could actually do with it. But the history, like I said, is fascinating. So it's a berry, a single soft seed with an embryo around it, like eggplants or bananas, something like that, right? It ranges from a dark green to an ivory. And if you are from a country like Honduras, you know that they're really, really plentiful. They've got them all the time, so much that the grocery stores don't necessarily want to stock them because you can get them anywhere. Trees, or not trees, but vines. Speaking of which, as Chef was saying, you can indeed eat not only the flesh, but the peeling as well as the seed. If you cook it long enough, even the vines and the flowers, or excuse me, the leaves. It really just depends upon how it is that you are going through this process of preparation. So when we ask the question of how did the Mirliton or the chayote and how did it get the name? How did it get to Louisiana? How is it such a staple in New Orleans? The answer is all about language and colonization. So it's said that the Canary Islanders, or the Los Isleños, were the ones who brought it here. And that is not untrue. But more specifically, we got it from the Caribbean migration that came from Middle America, from Central America, excuse me, yeah, Central America now, but Mesoamerica way back when. It was all of those countries with pre-Columbian societies, 1,000 years before the Spanish colonials. You got to the Americas, etc. Anyways, what that says is simply that the French, the English, and the Spanish all spread the Mirlitons wherever it was that they went. But to the history, right? So 1675, there was a shipwreck off of the coast of St. Vincent, which is where West Africans became maroons, and Garinogo, which is an individual part of Garifuna. And these were the ones who were not enslaved. These were the ones who fought for their independence and who lived on the island free. In fact, they waged 100-year war with the English in order not to be captured and enslaved. And it was not until around 1775 when the English had, there were several islands, 17, there we go. they'd expanded their colonizing, but they also had more forts and infrastructure in order to essentially beat the Africans into submission. And so what happened is that they were captured. Some of them were brought to the mainland of Honduras. Some of them moved down to Belize, but we also had some who, as they moved, they brought with them the things that they ate, right? So if we are still in that same sort of area, this is a plant or a fruit or whatever it is you want to call it, even though it's a fruit, that that did exist already, and so they were just adding their flavors to it. And so 1763, there is the Great Britain ceded ownership of Louisiana to Spain, which is part of a treaty of that was the end of the French-American War. But the thing is that the Spanish, who had been in Central America, also were intermixing with the Moors, who were African and Black, and those spices from the spice trail and the spice trade moved with them. And so I find it fascinating that they also had a taste for rice that meant that, which is, just keep that in the back of your mind. They had a taste for rice that was expanded by the seasonings, the flavors, and the way that they cook things. And that's also something that was really important to New Orleans with the Africans who were doing the cooking, but it was under the banner of French. And so, as French people go, everything under the French flag is now French. So 1789 to about 1815, there were 15 to 20,000 Haitian refugees that migrated into Louisiana. That meant that somewhere between 80 and 90% settled in New Orleans, mainly because it's a port city. Now, this is all around the time. 1791 is when the Haitian Revolution kicks off, right? And so these would have been enslaved people who were living on the island of Hispaniola and who had started fighting for their rights to be free. Now, every time I hear about the Haitian Revolution, it sounds like, it's a kind of 10-day thing, but it wasn't. It was from 1791 to 1804 that these people were consistently fighting for their right to be free. And it wasn't until we had folks who were trying to get off. Oh, what happened? Okay. It wasn't until we had people who were trying to get off of that island that we had more migration into into Caribbean areas. So think coming from Haiti into Cuba would have been folks leaving, right? So these are African or of African descent who were moving from a French colony into a Spanish colony, and they thought that they were good, so all in the same little area until around the time that 1806 or so. Yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. But anyway, 1796 is when we've got the Garifuna are exiled from Honduras as prisoners of war. 1797, they were later to move to the mainland and then allied with Spain. And then in 1803, which is really interesting, is when Napoleon sold Louisiana. And everybody knows that, but but there's never a why. Like, why did he sell Louisiana? Why was it important? He had a number of wars, right? So the Napoleonic wars that were going on in France, but he was also trying to put down the revolution in Haiti, and he needed money. In order to get the money, he sold Louisiana, which went, all the way up. But by doing that, he also put his brother, he exiled the monarchy of Spain and put his brother on the throne, right? So we're 1803, 1806, where we've got Haitians who've moved to Cuba. Cuba gets mad about Spain having, this French monarch now suddenly controlling them, and they kick out the Garifuna, the Haitians, right? But they certainly are still taking with them the things that they pick up. So they've started in off the coast of Africa, the Canary Islands. They have come to the Caribbean and settled in Haiti. Some have moved then to Louisiana. Some others have gone to Cuba. The ones who left Cuba are now trying to figure out what they're going to do and where they're going to go. Many of them end up here, again, because we're a port city and we're not that far when you start to think about it. But there were, by 1810, more than 9,000 of the Haitians reached Louisiana from Cuba, and the Haitian population was equal then in percentages whites, free people of color, and enslaved people that were 80% Black. So all of that is to say that the slave trade, which has that impacts the African diaspora, also impacts the way that we eat and the language and the way that we talk about things. The earliest Louisiana mention of the Mirliton is from 1847. And it's interesting because it's called a Mirliton because that's what the French called it. It's stuck in Louisiana, but not everywhere else. In other parts of the country, they do call it a chayote spot. And I was just talking to Chef, and she was saying that they call it, what's again? Patastic. They call it patastic. But there are also parts of there was an Americanization of the fruit in order to sell it, where they started calling it a vegetable pear. And we were laughing earlier before the program started about how everything is related back to a pear, because that's what the English or the Americans could understand. It made it less exotic, right? So it wasn't something that was strange or unusual. It was a type of pear. It also made it more white, right? So it no longer has these indigenous connections. It's no longer connected to Haitians or Spanish people. It's now something that everybody can eat. But the thing is that it didn't catch on with everybody. It's stuck in Louisiana, but not everywhere across the US. So, ma'am?
I would say we're cooking.
We're cooking anything, but it gotta be good. So true that. There was also there was a question about peeling it. There are a lot of different ways that you can cook it. Amongst it is definitely to peel it, but in Louisiana, it was too time consuming to peel it. So for a lot of folk, they just boiled it until all of it was soft. And then, we use it for stuffing, we use it in dressings and things like that. Yeah. So anywho, the most interesting thing I think about this whole process is that the Mirlitons themselves are, they don't have a whole lot of taste or flavor, right? Again, they're part of the cucumber family. And so there are some really interesting things that have been done with Mirlitons over time. One is that they have been used as a substitute for apples in making pie. This makes a lot of sense when you start to think about the fact that we do not grow apples here. And if you really did want the taste or flavor of an apple, it was very difficult to get. But in South Carolina, for instance, there's a green tomato pie that has the same sort of flavors of an apple pie, and that's because of the seasonings and the spices. Same thing with the Mirliton. If you cook it, cut it, cube it, then you can actually add the same types of flavorings and spices, and that will actually give you something that is very much akin to the apple pie because of the texture. I have not eaten it raw, but supposedly when you eat it raw, it tastes very close to a cucumber. It's very fresh. And I actually did want to try to make, but I forgot to make a Mirliton bread. So there's sort of a quick bread that you can make with Mirlitons. And the thing is, when you start thinking about the folks who were first here, they would have eaten whatever was available. And anybody who's ever seen Mirlitons grow, they are bountiful crops. And so trying to figure out some sort of a way in order to actually make those useful would have been, the order of the day. But Mirliton dressing is a really good example of Spanish and African influence. So when you start thinking about not just the Mirliton that would have been coming with the Africans through Central America, but also the Spanish and their spices that would have been influenced by the Africans that came from south of them, so in northern coast of Africa, across like the spice trade. A lot of the techniques that Spanish and French chefs used were African. They knew how to work with these different types of crops and make them more interesting or better tasting than what they were. But last thing is that there are a lot more dishes that have a Spanish and African influence, like jambalaya, which is very much akin to a paella. It's also very close to arroz con pollo, where you take the local ingredients, whatever it is, sort of meat that you want to use, and then you add in your trinity or your sofrito at one point or another of the actual cooking. So as I'm thinking, for whatever reason, a sofrito that's used in order to saute down into, say, your beans or some, or for instance, right, your and in fact chef was saying that she used something that was very close to a trinity with the onions and garlic and cilantro and celery and the things that you could actually find in your garden. So the ways that we cook and the ways that we prepare things are really only distinguished by the fact that we are using different vegetables in order to make those a real thing. Anyway, so there's also like a dirty rice, for instance, that you use the debris as well as a trinity and some whatever spices that you might have. And the last thing is that there was indeed a Mirliton festival that I am sad to say is no longer. They started in 1990, and then in 2015 they had some issues with weather, and took a beating because they paid for everything and then got rained out and just haven't been able to stand themselves back up again. But who knows? Maybe we will be inspired or inspire the Bywater to revitalize their Mirliton festival, or we can move it somewhere else in town. Whew, it was a lot of talking.
You did well.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. So
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
if you notice, we only call on the best.
Oh, keep feeding me. I'll just keep coming back. You don't have to flatter me.
So,
It's helpful. It's
so
helpful.
in learning what you so for folks who can't see me, I'm Angela Chalk with Health and Community Services, partnering with thank you, Pepper, partnering with Margie from Sprout Nola. So the question I have, which was interesting, when you mentioned about the pie. So if we were to put apples along with this pie, it seems as though we're saying that the melatonin has no taste, but it will take on the taste of what it is that we're cooking it with. So would that be a melatonin apple pie?
You could, and but the thing is that the taste of the apple pie, for the most part, is coming from the seasoning. So when you think cinnamon and the nutmeg and your sugars, you've got right, so things like that. If you were to add, say, golden raisins,
I want to make sure we can all kind of.
if you were to add golden raisins, that will give it a meatiness or give the pie a meatiness that the Mirlitons that it would not have on its own. And so you wouldn't have to have them, but you could, right? So the Mirlitons, when you think about them, they're mostly water, and they absorb. They're the original tofu. They absorb the spices and the flavorings of everything that's around it, and so you whatever it is that you want to give to it, you can. And so I mean, there are all sorts of fun things that you can do with it. Use it for fillers and sopa de marisco. It adds a little bit of body to the stew. It's a bit of a stretcher.
So this has been a learning process. I didn't know that. You know that when we started this?
Why?